How are you this morning?
I'm good. I'm very good.
Good. It's great to see you. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah.
Angela and I met through Fit for Service, which is I guess it's a year-long coaching community building program. Kind of felt right off the bat that we are soul sisters. We're lucky enough to roommate at our first summit for Fit for Service. Angela is a trauma-informed relationship coach who helps high achievers and purpose-driven people heal their unresolved relationship wounds and blocks to love so they can finally experience the deeply satisfying relationships they truly desire. She specializes in attachment and uses conscious reparenting, masculine and feminine energy dynamics, polarity, and parts work to help her clients heal and create the kinds of lives they truly want. She joined the Army out of high school and became a Korean linguist and noncommissioned officer and was recruited to be a Korean language instructor at the NSA, but ended up leaving to work as a contractor at the Office of Naval Intelligence, doing program management on an unclassified maritime tracking system. By then, her marriage was crumbling. She was offered a promotion to be a regional manager, and instead she decided to leave the government and pursue acting, which was her original passion and something she had been doing since she was a kid. She moved to New York after getting Lyme's disease and got accepted into NYU's Tish School for the Arts and got her BFA. She did some stand-up and sketch comedy, and due to a partially detached retina and some discoveries made in acting school, decided to pivot into coaching and learning more about her own trauma history and how it had influenced her life. So she ended up becoming an IFC Certified coach through iPEC's year-long certification process and entered into a series of high-profile mentorships with some of the best in the field to do what she's doing today. She is the founder and owner of Epic Initiator.
That's all right.
Welcome to the podcast.
Just like laughing at that bio. I'm like, holy shit, it's so wordy. Yeah.
That's quite an experience, a lot of experience. And of course, a lot of it has been left out because, life is complicated.
Yeah, like I left out when I got married, but I thought I should put the divorce part in. So yes, I got married too in there.
I think we'll get to that probably. Okay, so I'm Rihanna Ritter. I am considering coaching. I've built an online course and have a master's in business and a bachelor's in accounting, and have worked in corporate accounting and had my own accounting firm, still do, and exploring more of my own trauma. So this should be a fun conversation about lots of trauma.
Trauma, mama. Trauma and drama.
Yes, exactly. I would like to explore how you ended up realizing, you had the detached retina, and what are some of these discoveries that you made in acting school that pivoted you toward coaching?
It's really funny because I remember when I got married, I actually married my husband before I met his family. Big mistake. I don't recommend that. But it was one of those things, like we were in the Army and it just it seemed to make a lot of sense. We wanted to be together and we were both being assigned to Asia, to Korea. And I was like 18 and he was like a couple years older. So it just seemed like we still want to be together. So we did. I ended up meeting his family. And for whatever reason, I could really I think as humans, we can actually really see dysfunction if we really think about it, depending on what is actually functional in our background. For example, if you come from a really well-kept, clean, tidy, organized home, and then you meet someone and it's very dirty and disorganized and chaotic and grimy, you're probably going to notice that there's a difference. So there were some things like that kind of happened when I met his family, where I was like, oh, holy shit, what the hell? Okay. And then I could see that there was this enabling And I kind of knew what enabling was, but I didn't really know what codependence was. And so I remember just being married and seeing certain things, but not really knowing how, like what part I was playing in that or how I fit into that. Like I was very much completely blind to all of that. Flash forward to like lots of really fucked up stuff that happened. Like, it's a whole, that would like take a whole podcast, but you know, our marriage started to crumble, started to fall apart. I find that when we build things unconsciously, like you can manifest things and not really know how you manifest or create things. And then if that isn't built on authentic, like solid energy, it can all kind of go away. It's like building like a castle or building a castle on like sand. So anyway, all that started devolving, and it was very challenging. And that was probably like one of my first awakenings where I just felt like my heart was taken out of my chest and like thrown on the ground, and he was doing a little Irish river dance on it, and I was like, I can't breathe, and like what the fuck is happening? There was like a lot of really tough things, but what it did was empowered me to like go into the kind of life that I really wanted to create. So I ended up getting Lyme disease, which was like a swift kick in my ass to be like, hey, you could die. So maybe like try to pursue some of these dreams. And so I did. And when I got into acting school, I just remember I think the very first thing that happened, it wasn't my first year, it was my second year there. And we were studying Chekhov. We were doing like script analysis, I believe was the course. And we had a very passionate teacher. She's really quite incredible. Her name was Anya. I can't remember her last name. She's like very well known at like the Atlantic Acting School.
Okay.
And we did this scene at a couple of scene partners, and we did a scene from The Three Sisters. And for whatever reason, and mind you, I was like 30 years old when I went back into college. So I'm like 30, just turned 30, and all these kids are like 18. So I've got a 20-year lead on them. One of them thought I was a pathological liar when I was like, yeah, I was in the army and I worked for the government, and they were like, she's full of shit. But
Wow.
I just was like older, I guess, and she didn't. I usually look like a little bit younger than my age, so people are like, oh. So but it was cool. She thought I was a pathological liar. It's fine. And for whatever reason, when I read that script and when we did it, it was like the scene was I'm trying to remember. It was like a fire in the village, and like a lot of people lost their homes, and they had the three sisters in their house. Like they had triage set up, and they were burn victims and people that had died, and just like a loss and grief and all this stuff. Well, Angela back then, this is like a walk in the park, you know, that kind of like chaos to my nervous system. I was just like, you just go in and it's like kind of whatever. So my teacher at the end like ripped us a new asshole kind of, and she was like, Angela, I just don't get it. She's like, you are one of the most empathic, generous actors I've ever met. She was like, you feel so deeply. And she's like, what was this? And I like
Interesting.
I looked at it again, and it like snapped me out of something where I was able to like take a step back, and I looked at the script again, and I was like, holy shit, like how did I miss that? Like how was I able to like gloss over all of the deeper things that were really happening and the stakes? And what I know now is that I like just kind of was able to dissociate and not feel some things. And so that was
Right.
like the first one. There were at like three others that happened. One, I was doing a scene where it was I think the name of the play was Orange Flower Water, and it's about like couples that are getting divorced. There's like infidelity and stuff. So I was like, yeah, this is very familiar. I can do this. And one of the scenes, my scene partner did something he never did before. And he like took the suitcase that I was packing and like slammed it on the ground. And when he did, it like triggered me when I was in the scene. And I just went into like fawn mode. Like I really don't know exactly. but one of my teachers was like,
Was this a rehearsal or on stage?
it was like a working rehearsal. It wasn't on
Okay.
stage. Yeah, it was like in a classroom, but we were working the scene. So it was, he and I had rehearsed it many times. We worked on it for quite some time. And but she was like, well, what was that? Like, what happened? Because she was like, it didn't seem like the character. It seemed like you had made some choices or something happened. And so I had another chance to be like, oh, what did happen? Like, that actually wasn't related to the scene. It was related to all this other history that was actually mine. And then a third one was getting a review, because we would get these yearly reviews. And one of my other teachers, and these are all like spectacular, amazing, like really skilled, like just they're really badass people. They're really great. Kelly Marr from City Company, and they practice something called Suzuki, which is like Japanese theater and like movement, which is really cool. So we were doing a bunch of that. But something that she wrote about me on my like performance review was that I was so self-conscious. Like, she could tell I was so very hyper vigilant and self-aware. And I just remember looking at that and being like, yeah, it's really hard for me not to like be very careful and worried about how I'm looking and how I come across and things all the time. And then that would affect my ability to like sometimes focus or be in the present moment. And then really like the pièce de résistance, I don't really know what that means, some French word for like the big thing, right?
Okay. I haven't heard it, but
it's a thing. But I was gonna say, like, the cherry on top of the cake, like the really big moment was with one of my teachers, Katie Bull, and she was like our voice teacher. And at the time, we were doing something called the Fitzmaurice technique, which is really like trauma releasing exercises. It's inducing neurogenic tremoring so that you're releasing held tension patterns in your body, which can then like open your voice and open your instrument. So it causes your fascia to actually like release all these things that they've been holding. So it is like what I was witnessing and what I had witnessed a lot of, not just starting there, but in my journey of like working in studios. I went to Canada's National Voice Intensive and we did a bunch of work. So I started to realize that all of this body work and things that I was doing as an actor was actually releasing held trauma patterns that were like in my muscles and like just like held. I didn't know that till like later, but I was like observing it and watching it and seeing it happen. And it was really, to me, it looked a little bit weird. You know, at first I was like, this is some crazy shit. But then you just get used to it because like when you're an actor, you just do weird shit. Like you'll like crawl around and act like reptiles. You'll like embody the different seasons and you'll do eye gazing and walk around each other. And you'll say, there's like the Meisner technique where you'll be like, you look constipated, and they'll be like, you look confused. And you just go back and forth and like kind of share what you think is going on in the moment. And so there's just so much of that. You just kind of get used to all these little different things. But I was working on a scene from Julius Caesar, and there was a moment when I was supposed to get really, really mad. And I think I was playing Julius Caesar's daughter. And this was just like, we were, working on these scripts just for the purpose of like vocal exercises and things. And something that I realized was like, I was supposed to be getting angry with my father in the scene, and I could not feel my anger at all. I'm like, I don't feel any anger. I don't feel any irritation. Like, I just don't feel anything. I feel numb. And so I was like sitting on my yoga mat, and my teacher came up to me and I told her that I was like, I'm struggling with this. I can't find my anger, which is unusual. And she said, do you mind if I ask you some personal questions? And I was like, sure, go ahead. And she said, she's like, are either of your parents like alcoholics? And I was like, no, not that I'm aware. is there any drugs involved? No. Gambling, work, like she just like went on and on through the list. And I was like, this is interesting. Where's this line of questioning going? Well, finally she says rageaholic. And just I was like, oh wow. I was like, that really sounds like my dad. So she made a recommendation to me that I read the drama of The Gifted Child by Alice Miller. And so over that summer, yeah, I did. And like it just like a lot of light bulbs went off, many light bulb moments. And then from there, it was just like I couldn't stop. It was like something new happened. And that was really interesting. So that really kind of started all of my, it's like I'd been seeing things for so long, I just didn't have any answers. And I really do think if it hadn't been for that kind of work that I was doing, like in the acting studios, to like actually see my own perspective and to see how I was like encountering the script and different characters. And I don't know that I don't know how I would have like kind of figured those things out, but it was like through that experience, and I was just like, holy shit, there's all kinds of stuff here that I've never dealt with.
Yeah, so let's go back to that scene in The Three Sisters where you said the word that stuck out to me, dissociation. And I found that for my healing, the dissociation was probably the thing that caused me to live out my life in a lot of anger, which I really didn't know for a very long time. But that happened with me at a young age. And the thing that catalyzed my healing was when I finally put together that I need to come back into my body. So you talked about somatic work, body work. I was watching all of these videos from spiritual teachers, and I was like, it was all the mind. And I was thinking through these things and trying to remember things. But until I connected the mind body, made that mind body connection and learned that I needed to stop disassociating from my body, nothing was landing, nothing was sticking. So when you were talking about dissociation, I don't know how much you want to talk about if you remember when you started that. I'm sure that Army training kind of helped you dissociate even further, or would it be?
It kind of was just a natural fit.
Okay.
When it started, I don't exactly know, but what I will tell you is I was a very willful child. I was very stubborn. I was very emotional, very empathic, very aware of everything that was going on. And it's funny, you sent me all those little things about like the different child archetypes, which it's funny, I've heard a little bit about them, but reading them, I was like, oh yeah, for sure. There was like a lot of these. I feel like I resonate with every single one of them. And I feel like probably as humans, we embody all of them to like some degree. But something that I felt like would be relevant to share with you was as a child, I had the real, like, maybe I was a weird kid. I mean, I was in some ways for sure, but what I mean by weird is like, I remember like watching myself and certain things, like noticing what I was doing, but not knowing why.
Mm.
And what I realize now is like that was probably like part of my soul, or that witness that was like like I could see myself. Like I started doing that when I was young, and then I kind of lost it. I remember losing it after and actually I can kind of pinpoint a time when I became very identified, like completely like lost in everything, and I stopped doing that so much. But something that I did when I was like 4 or 5 was I had this doll, and her name was Megan, and she was like my bad doll. she would like misbehave. I don't know what she would do, but I would like put her in the dryer, or I would put her in the freezer. Like I would punish her. And it's funny because it's not funny. It's funny, not funny.
Well, it was a doll, so it's okay.
It was a doll, right? But it's like, when you think about it, like what is passed on generationally, we will like replicate and reenact and like live through the patterns that are there. And even though I didn't really have a sense, I don't have memories of this kind of thing happening. My mom said my dad was like very volatile when I was younger. I didn't have a lot of memories of that. And so what I think I was doing was finding a way to put that abuse that I had encountered, or what I couldn't make sense of, and all of that shame, I was like channeling it into this poor baby doll that thankfully was just an inanimate object that I was torturing.
Yeah.
So what was crazy is I ended up writing an article about this for the Elephant Journal. I would just write a lot based on inspiration about, kind of like, hey, if you're doing something like this, like you may have some trauma, like maybe you want to look into it, whatever. Or you're normal, like it's kind of normal, but it doesn't seem normal. It's not entirely normal, like healthy, normal, different words. But I ended up at this family reunion and I told my aunt about it, and she goes, oh my God. She said, when I was a kid, she said, I used to burn my dolls under hot water. And I like had another one of those like, what the fuck moments. Like, how long has this kind of thing been in our generational, our tree, our family tree? And so there was something in me when I had the realization, because I could see that I had done that. There was a part of me that made a decision that I didn't want to have children until I knew that I wouldn't do something like that to them, because I thought, if I was doing that to a baby doll, that there was some kind of part in me that would likely reenact that with something vulnerable.
Okay.
So it scared me. It scared me to be like, oh, that's in me. And I knew I realized the way to heal that wasn't to shame it, but also not to be afraid of it either,
and repress it. Yeah.
And repress it. So so that was part of something that I was working on. And I feel like I didn't answer your question, but I meant to. But
I think you did.
Yeah, about the dissociation when it started. So I actually think it started around age 8, but it was, what I feel like I went through was complex trauma, which was like a series of psychological intimidation and emotional abuse and neglect, and a little bit of like, the more traditional, like, you did this, you're going to get spanked, or go to your room and feel your feelings there, you can't feel that here, that kind of thing. But also just like I would throw tantrums when I was little, and I would get abandoned when I was doing that. My parents would just walk away wherever I was. So I didn't have a lot of options when it came to feeling and trying to get co-regulation for my big feelings. It was more like, go to your room and scream into a pillow, or go somewhere else, or I would get punished or rejected, or I would get screamed at. So it was almost like I didn't have a place to feel anything that I was feeling, and I was feeling everything. And I also I was one of 4 other siblings, which then became 5 other siblings. But I do think it was by the time I was 8, 8 or so, that was the time I moved to Texas, that I think I got pretty good at numbing my feelings.
Yeah, numbing. It's interesting because those things are, or definitely were, actually considered good parenting advice. Telling your child to leave the room and do that elsewhere. And I have done that with my kids. especially when they're doing it specifically for attention, when they know that they've crossed a boundary and what they're really looking for is attention. So it's funny that we have been taught that don't give them attention.
Right. Don't give it.
Reject them. Tell them to get out.
They're being willful. They're being spoiled. Don't give it to them. Send them away. Teach them a lesson.
Yes.
Needy around me, you get rejected. Bye-bye.
Yes. That and I think many of us were taught that our feelings were too big for anybody else to feel, especially our parents. I was certainly taught that as a kid. And as a parent, I was not conscious that I was conscious that the way my parents raised me was not ideal, but I didn't have any other tools to raise my kids any differently. So probably having kids was the catalyst for my healing, because I would watch myself engage in this behavior that I recall being so angry at my parents for doing to me, and feeling like something isn't right about the way that I'm handling this. And so then going back to my kids and apologizing and saying, I had a conversation with my daughter the other day about soccer, and she's big on soccer. She's very talented at it. And there will be times when her dad has called out her teammates after a game went poorly, and said that in the car on the way home, that teammate did well, and that teammate played aggressively, and that teammate was awesome. And Charlie would just be sitting there like, what about me? And yeah, you did good. And so it would make her cry, and I'd be watching it. And so it only happened twice, but both times I was there and I called him out on it. And I was like, this is your dad. I took her aside a different time and said, this is your dad reliving something that he's hurting about. It really doesn't have to do with the way that you're playing the game. You're always out there playing your best and doing your best. When he says those things, it's because there's something going on, and I can't say for sure, but I get the feeling that maybe he was told that soccer wasn't going to be an option as a career for him, when it really should have been, because he was good enough. Yeah. And she said, yeah, actually Dad said that to me, and that he was told he wouldn't get to do that. I was like, okay, yeah, so here's an area where I'm doing that to you as well. Whenever you start, bickering with your brother, I start yelling, and I'm like, you're always starting fights. You're always looking for conflict. And I shouldn't be saying that to you, because you're not always looking for conflict. There are certain ways we can't allow people to talk to us. And the reason I'm doing that is because I couldn't handle all the fighting in my house when I was a kid. I had 5 older siblings. And when the fights would break out, I would freak out and think I was going to die. And so when I see fighting now, I still react that way, but it's really not about you. And so when you see me do that, know that that's what I'm doing. And it's really not, your problem. Doesn't mean you should be looking for conflict, but.
Right. Yeah. God, I have quite a few clients. Many of my clients are parents, and I want to tell them how amazing it is when they do their own healing work, how that has massive ripple effects for their children. And I want them to understand like the value and the beauty and the importance of doing that, because like the power of an apology from a parent to say, hey, I wasn't perfect and I'm sorry I hurt you, is like, it's a big deal. And it's a big deal when you have a parent that says, you know, I missed the mark and I'm willing to do what it takes to do better. Now watch me be accountable. And,
Yeah.
you know, not all of us get that from our parents, but for those that are doing it, it's a real gift, and it's really, really important. So
Yeah, that's I mean, often the best we can do, because we're gonna make mistakes.
yeah,
And
it's inevitable.
and you know, when I had Barbies, I ripped their heads off and stripped them. I mean, and I definitely had moments where I was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a terrible parent. And I certainly make mistakes, but I think you'd probably be a pretty great mom if you chose to do that. So
as it turns out, I was a really, really good dog mom. I had a Yorkshire Aussie Terrier for about 18 and a half years.
Yeah, and you didn't desire to put them in the dryer. No.
Rarely ever did I want to put her in the dryer. It's like, I mean, I would, it's so funny. I had my moments of, you know, like I could feel those instincts come up in me. And it's like those parts I really had to work with. And it was weird because I could feel them come up. And like at first, it just terrified me. Like I was like, oh, fuck, there's something wrong with me, or I have this thing. And then it was more like, sit on your hands, breathe, go do anything but follow through on the unconscious impulses. And then learning to like feel all of that anger and realize that a lot of it was like some form of unmet need or fear. Like yeah, it was really interesting. It is something I still you know, I think these things are layered. It's something I still work with, but I know like awareness of those things, like most people know, like if you hear me, like, you know, my favorite quote, or we'll hear it at some point, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. It's truly like awareness is that little spark of light that helps to illuminate what's there. And that's the beginning of the process, is like being aware of what's there and then deciding that you want to choose to create something different. And then from there, it's like you can start to build that consciousness muscle to where you actually have such fine attunement to your own emotions and your thoughts and what's going on with you, that you're able to have that in the moment where you're able to step back and watch yourself. And instead of going down the unconscious pathway, the well-grooved neural pathway, you can actually, maybe clunkily, maybe it takes a long time, but you go, and you start to stretch over into the new, like, uncomfortable thing, which is kind of like what we do for every area where we've got triggers. Like the trigger is gonna cause that instantaneous, almost like reaction. And then the difference is like to say, well, how do I really want to respond? And then to start to choose who we want to become, and then put our focus and attention and everything there, so that we actually, through accountability and consistency and practice, become that version of ourselves that we want.
A lot of people, I think it was my perception that healing would be a linear path, and it's more like a spiral.
Like this.
You're going up and down, up and down, revisiting. And the accountability is the thing that gets you on that path consistently. And it's not what any of us wants to hear at the beginning, because I think, you know, we all want to tell our story, and we want to talk about this was done to me and that was done to me. The repetitive thing that has been going through our head, our inner critic, which has most likely been handed down to us by our parents or other adult figures in our childhood, even siblings. And we want to express that, you know, rage and the blame, and And we do, part of the process is feeling through all of that and expressing it, but it isn't really about blame. It's really about, okay, I was a child then, I didn't have the power and the choices, but now I do. And do I want to continue living my every thought down that path and replaying that same thing? Because 95% of our thoughts are a repeat from yesterday. So
that wild.
Yeah. And so part of that, I would say, you talked about neurogenic. Can you expand on that?
The neurogenic tremoring?
Yeah, that sounds really interesting to me.
So neurogenic tremoring is really it's so if you've ever, like, we see this in nature, we see it in animals a lot. Humans, we're really good at like shutting this mechanism down, but it's like, if you've ever seen an animal that like outruns their predator and they sit there and they're like and they're shaking, they're just like ugh. Their body knows how to discharge all of that built up tension and all the cortisol. It knows there's a process to like kind of dump those hormones and just start to like neutralize. And I don't really know the entire like biophysical whatever process behind it, but what I do know is, as humans, we end up collecting a lot of stress and tension, but we don't shake often, unless you see someone who's been through something. You might see them like shiver, or you might see them like and the thing is to not stop that process, but to allow it, because it really is like a diffusing of like all that energy, right? So if you have like a bunch of tension and you release it, and then it's like little shock waves that are moving through. So what ends up happening through complex trauma or repetitive trauma or even built up stress from day to day is, if you read like Bessel van der Kolk's, or there's a great book on it that specifically addresses this. It's Dr. David Berceli, Trauma Releasing Exercises. And he goes around really helping people like work directly with their bodies to do those somatic releases. So a couple things you can do is actually like invite that practice. You can do it for a few times a week for like 15 minutes. It'll allow you to like just release some of the tension. Like I've healed some like rotator cuff injuries. Like I had a issue where I wasn't able to kind of like do that because my arm was like fucked up. And through practicing that, like it healed some of that stuff. It can release emotional stuff. It's really good. And the other thing that I really think it enabled me to do was to be able to hold space for all of that emotional charge that moved through me as I was like healing some deeper stuff that I never got to process, which a lot of was like early childhood fear and terror of being obliterated, or having or seeing my mother, or the fear that my mother would be killed or something and I wouldn't have any control over it.
Oh, that's
which are very big feelings for a little tiny person.
Yeah.
Even for a big person, that's scary. It has allowed me to allow certain feelings to pass through. And I think the practice of that has actually allowed me to shake sometimes when I need to naturally and not suppress that natural process. Because most of the times when we're scared, we'll be like, just squeeze it and push it down, you know? Instead of like allowing ourselves to kind of shake or feel or cry. Like you'll notice the two emotions that are very similar, crying and laughter, are both a form of catharsis. They're release, and they both involve shaking.
They do. That's so true.
Shaking or crying.
And shaking is so acceptable if you're laughing, but in our society, it's not acceptable. You look like you're a psycho when everybody's scared.
Yeah, or if you've ever seen someone get so angry, they shake too. So it's like there's something about the body that naturally is working to try to neutralize some of that energy. That's
Emily Nagoski, I don't know if I said her last name right. She wrote a book called Come As You Are, and she talks about that.
I've heard of it.
It's yeah, it's about sexuality in general.
So
And but
releasing
she
from the pelvis, right? And the like why women cry after orgasm. Does she address?
I don't think she talked about that, but she was talking
Oh,
about just the completion of the stress response cycle and how, in our caveman days when we were chased by a saber-toothed tiger, you know, we had to run, do that fight or flight thing. And then after you reach a point of safety where you could have, your shaking and complete, at least the running, the act of running
yeah, running.
away
Mhm.
was part of completing the stress response cycle, where now our stress cycle is inappropriate. There's nothing chasing us. We don't, we often
Right.
don't physically release the stress out of our body. So it does get pent up. You were talking about that earlier, how
Yeah.
just daily stress can just build up over time. So these physical practices are so helpful to, well, they're necessary actually.
I like that
So
she wrote about that.
yeah, it's
Stress
it's a really
completion.
good book. She covers more than just sexuality, but it was funny because I recommended that book in a book club that I took over, so I got to be in charge of all the books. And most of the women were like, no, and they were older women, probably 60s, and still like liberal community, Palm Springs area. So I was pretty surprised that they were like, I don't want to, I don't want to read about female sexuality. It's just a generational thing, I think.
Yeah.
But also, weren't they growing up in the time of sex, love, and Woodstock?
Yeah, but if you think about it, there was probably Woodstock happening and also the polarized religion happening at the same time, which demonized that whole movement.
Right,
Like
right.
just engendered more fear and more opposition to like that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah. So the integration of the physical allowing. So I would just say that if you're sitting in therapy week after week, but you're not allowing these emotions to enter your body and feel them and do some kind of movement practice to help move it through, you might be finding yourself stagnant.
In
Yeah.
therapy for a really long time. And a couple things that I thought of when we were talking. One is since I thought that's where you were going with it, was when you have really good sex, it tends to really put a lot of stress on those muscles and joints, like the tendons, which is how you actually induce neurogenic tremoring. You kind of wear out you wear out those little I forget what the connector points are exactly, but it's spoken about in the book. And it's something that we always did in studio because we were doing the Fitzmaurice technique, which is it's really the same thing. So we did many different postures, and it was finding a way to kind of exhaust those like joint points so that we could cause that shake to happen. And then it would be to release and vocalize inside of that shaking. And then it was really fascinating to see what would come through. Like you would hear all kinds of things like rage or moaning or laughter, like all the repressed stuff just starts coming out.
Oh.
And so what happens a lot if let's say a woman, we release a lot of emotion and pent up stress through sex, and men also like lubricate their spines, and it pushes like fluid up through their spine. So it's actually like sex is such a healthy practice for people. But for women or people that like haven't had a good orgasm in a while and haven't had that shake, because also an orgasm causes us to shake, you can have a really big release from the hips, because we tend to hold a lot of tension and trauma, and depending on the kind of trauma you have, you can have a lot in your hips and your pelvis and your psoas. And so you can like release that, and then you may find yourself like crying or sobbing after some really good sex. And men that are very good lovers probably have seen that a time or two. I don't want to like indict anyone, but if you've never made a woman cry after sex, you might not be doing it right. Maybe not, right?
I could see that.
Right. And The other thing, not to shame anyone, just it's an experience that I think everyone should
We're all learning.
have. It's good, right? The other thing is when you were talking about blame, something that's interesting that I work with my clients on and that like I went through myself is to like allow there to be blame, allow there to be pettiness, but to think of it as like a Verbo or like an Airbnb, like a place you visit for a little bit, but you don't want to buy it and you don't want to set up resonance there.
Mm-hmm.
You want to go visit and like have your feelings and validate those feelings of blame or of anger, like allow yourself to have them to be like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then usually that blame will end up shifting. And then you can start taking radical responsibility for what's yours. And then you can like kind of work with some of the anger or whatever that's there. Cause it's just like emotions are, they just are. And we can either honor them and like be in an authentic emotional reality where like the feelings are here and I'm going to be really honest about it and I'm going to acknowledge them, or we're like la la, I'm not feeling this, or I shouldn't be feeling this, or let me stop, or I'm feeling this again. Like there's so many kinds of like subtle like self gaslighting or emotional repression and suppression that we do to ourselves where we actually enter into a place of emotional non-reality, and that's where we suffer greatly. Like anytime we're not really willing to confront reality as it is to some degree, we'll find suffering. And not to say reality has to stay the way it is. Like that's how we have this process of like manifestation and choosing and getting our power back and actually creating something else. But there's something really important about confronting the truth of actual reality that gives us the power to do something about it. Because if we're not being honest about how we feel or what's actually going on in this moment, there's no fucking way we can change it. And I think that we stunt our ability to actually manifest because we're really not having the emotional journey, we're not getting the messages, or we don't have the emotional wisdom that we need to actually like fuel that journey or light that path. And that's how I think a lot of people get, stuck or stunted.
That's funny. Self-gaslighting. I actually caught myself in that this past weekend because there are a lot of our emotions that have been so shamed and we are not allowed to feel, have never been allowed to feel. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if this is the time to share this, but
if you feel, it's up to you totally. If you feel like
but catching myself, I just recently went through a divorce and having all of this, resentment toward my ex that he didn't do this and he didn't do that. And then telling myself, nope, we're not spending time there. We are moving on. We are moving forward. We are, this is not productive. At some point, I did discover, okay, this is taking up too much space in my mind, and I need to go ahead and just take some time and deeply feel all this resentment and all this anger, and be by myself and close everything up and sit in the dark and do the tears and the rage and all the things so that I can stop allowing it to take so much real estate in my mind and in my body, because I have other things that I want to be doing with my life. And I didn't get a divorce just to stay resentful. I got a divorce to get away from all of that. And there was, more, it goes deeper than that, but deeply shaming myself for having feelings of revenge, like, oh, I want to get back at him for this, and being like, no, I'm not vengeful. No, I'm not doing that. Mm-mm. And then I'm like, yes, you are. Yes, you are.
You are.
You feel you want revenge. Okay.
Yeah.
So admit it. And so, it's important to do that, because then I was able to clear space and to stop with the ranting, that 95% that was continuing from the previous day. Just like, yeah, let yourself feel it, move your body, move through it. And one of the practices was womb work, which I had never done before, but it was like just moving of the hips and sound. It was a tantric practice.
Like a low, like sound.
Yeah, sound and breath and body movement. And at the beginning, I was like, I don't want to do this. This chick's like saying I have to move my hips for 30 minutes. This is stupid, you know.
Right.
Everything that I've found and come into, my first judgment is, this is stupid. This is, and then by the end of it, I'm like crying and I'm like, oh my God, I feel so much better. So yeah, the self-gaslighting, especially when you have been in a relationship where you have been gaslighted for many, many years, you start questioning your judgment and you start doing it to yourself. Like one of the things that I had done some research was that I can't trust myself. I can't trust myself. I can't trust. I kept repeating that to myself. And it's like, oh, well, there's a reason for that. So,
damn.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a deep one. You know, revenge is actually such a great sign of healing, which seems counterintuitive, right? You would think revenge, that's not healthy. It's actually a very powerful emotion that like wants you to move into action. And it's because like the origin of it is you feel really hurt and that something was unjust. So it's like, oh yeah, motherfucker. I'm not a victim anymore. I mean, we're still technically in victim consciousness, but it's like, I'm not going to be the victim that sits in the corner and lets you do this. Like nobody puts baby in a corner. Like I'm going to fucking come out of the corner. I'm going to fuck up your life. And obviously like we don't want to act on that revenge because that has real consequences, but revenge is so much of a better feeling than that feeling of powerlessness or not being able to acknowledge like the hurt and the damage that was done. And revenge, actually, feelings of revenge and entitlement and even like a bit of pettiness, these are hallmark signs of anxious attachment as it kind of steps more into its power. It gets pissed off. It's like, I needed this shit and you didn't give it to me. Fuck you. And it's very like loud and it's very angry. And there's so much rage. There's so much rage because as babies, like it is vitally important to our survival that we have entitlement, that we are entitled to that kind of care because children cannot self-regulate at all. They have no self-regulation skills, which is why a baby will die without touch. There's like so many powerful emotions that move through their body and they are quite literally dependent. So that narcissism there is like necessary. That entitlement is necessary. But what happens when we have wounds at that age and they don't get resolved, they kind of sit there and then we grow into these adult bodies, but we still have the little narcissist baby who just fucking needed some like TLC, like needed someone to hold them and be like, you're okay, I've got you. It's okay, cry. I'm not going to tell you to shh. I'm not going to like try to fix you. I'm going to be with you and let you know that you're safe and it's okay to feel these really big feelings.
Yeah. And that's another way that I found myself gaslighting myself, was pretending my whole life that I was avoidant attachment because anxious was so unacceptable. It was always like,
it's needy. It's fucking gross.
Yeah. In our family, we didn't have feelings, like let alone talk about them. We didn't even have them. That was not it. So for most of my life, I was like, I'm not feeling anything. What do you mean? Why are you asking me that? That's a strange question. I don't feel things. And so to then go through life pretending that I'm avoidant, I am, no, don't get too close to me. No, I don't want to talk about that. But that was really masking an anxious attachment style. So that's a pretty...
So common. Like what I find likely, I have some different theories about how we heal, but this is Angela's theory. don't know if it necessarily goes along with like the model of psychological development, but I think it makes sense. I think that when we have anxious attachment, it's unresolved. There's so much it's awful. It's like death. It's like free falling. So if you have anxious attachment around anything, that could be money, it could be I don't know if you're particularly into plants and like something happens to one of your plants and you're like, oh my God, my plants are dying. Like that's anxious attachment. You can have it with pets, you can have it with people, you can have it with belongings, you can have it with ideas, you can have it with your business. You can literally have it show up anywhere. But when that strategy fails, when you try to like scramble or pursue or get what you need and it gets shut down again, and we're like, oh, that doesn't work. So we try a secondary strategy, which is, I don't care. I don't care. I don't need you. I will die on this hill. You will never know how I feel inside. And I don't even know how I feel inside. So fuck you. Right. And so it's like this counter dependent mask that goes on over the anxiety that is like masquerading as avoidance, but isn't really. It's like got an avoidance flavor, but it's like when you really get underneath it, you realize, oh my God, there's this really, like rightfully so, part of us that really needed attention and validation and needed someone to see us and pursue us and say, you matter to me. I'm happy you're here. I love you. I care about you. I want to know how you feel. I'm never going to leave you. Even if you're feeling this, that, or the other, I'm going to be here with you. I'm not going to make you go away. I'm not going to reject you. I'm not going to shame you. I'm not going to punish you. I want to understand you. It's like, that makes sense. And then when like the avoidance stuff, I think actually come like real avoidance, I think comes from when we have a lot of things heaped on top of us, like when people dump their emotions or when we have certain boundary violations or we're not allowed to have boundaries. And we have people up in our space and up in our business going behind us and saying, no, don't do that. I'll do it better. Or stop doing that. You know, it's like someone's energy is always like coming at you and kind of nitpicking. And so it's like you can feel very naked or overwhelmed or very sensitive to criticism. And it can also come from just neglect of not even knowing what it feels like to relate to another human because you never had anyone hold you. So you just learned how to find a substance or a way to commune with nature, or you learned to find an attachment figure that was not human. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's like super functional.
Right.
Right. Because that can be a process or it can be a series of micro addictions. It can be really sneaky and subtle. So they all have different flavors, but they're all based in fear and therefore anxiety of certain types, but different flavors of anxiety. Anxious attachment has a fear of an abandonment or rejection. And then it's like, I'll be abandoned, rejected, and then I'll die. Avoidance says I'll be enmeshed, I'll be bowled over, I will lose my identity, and then I will die. I'll be suffocated, and then I'll die.
Yeah. So all of that's going on over here.
Super fun. Good times.
I think most people probably have a slight degree of probably each of those. I mean, to find securely attached people is, I don't know many, if any. But I think our society, you know, the way that most of us were raised, it was just a perpetuation of what was taught before. You know, the generation before and before and before. To be liked, you have to be kind of like a statue, appropriate all the time, don't have big emotions, don't you know, fit in, do the job that is secure, that has a pension, and that fell apart. You know, nobody has pensions anymore. But the parents thought they were doing the right thing by teaching that, and then people are slowly, you know, dying because they're not following their passions and they've shamed their own desires because they were shamed from the beginning. So there's a lot of hopelessness and a lot of lack of direction in people's lives. So, and we were talking, I think, yesterday about the shows that we were watching in childhood because of that Fit for Service newsletter that Clayton wrote. And yours was The Last Unicorn, mine was Rainbow Bright. And just funny how us growing up, I think our generation was kind of a strange generation because both parents had begun working. So maybe we were raised by the TV a lot. Maybe we were those interesting religious dynamics were still being programmed into us, but everybody was rebelling against them at the same time. So to notice that the TV programming at that time was all about, be a light worker and
It really was. It was like the battle of good versus evil. Like there were so many, it was like hero's journey, like Joseph Campbell shit. A lot of it. And that's what I wonder is like, can we ever extricate the hero's journey from like the stories that we tell as humans, or is that just baked into everything naturally?
Yeah, well, I think it's also part of the adventure of the lifetime. I mean, we are here to have these big emotions and experiences, and maybe suppressing them for a while is part of the battle, between good and evil. But to just accept that we are not looking for a destination and that we are here to actually just feel and experience the things that are right in front of us has been a very interesting reframe of what life is supposed to be for me, because overachieving, people pleasing perfectionist became an accountant, which is, you need to be that to be an accountant. But all of that comes from deep insecurity, like not being seen, and maybe there are accountants who just really love numbers, maybe, but I'm not one of them. So it's funny to I was always, on this trajectory towards this end goal, and then I'd meet that goal, and it was like, I need a new goal. So I found myself, a corporate controller, pregnant, getting a master's degree, and then recruited by some other big company and going over there and trying to implement all new IT systems, like with a baby, at 2 kids at home, commuting, like,
oh my God.
Why? I mean, and then it just led to burnout. It just led to none of that external validation ever ended up being fulfilling. And the next goal without celebrating the one that I just achieved just started to feel empty and pointless.
Success is a hyper consumable commodity. Yum, yum, yum. I'm not tasting it, but I'm doing it. Yum, yum, yum.
Yeah. And learning to just enjoy your moments, to like the book, The Four Agreements, when
Fantastic.
he says, notice how good that feels when you're breathing. I was like, what? It feels good to breathe? And so I was like, let me see. Wow, it does. There's a physical sensation there.
Holy shit. Oh, yeah.
And then you realize how long you've been holding your breath, like when you're one of those overachieving.
That's so funny. I was talking to a friend last night, and I don't know how it came up, but she asked me a question, which may have been, what the fuck was it? I think she was like, how are you feeling, or what was going on at such time? And I told her that I remembered, like, I wasn't doing so okay when I found myself like standing at my sink and washing dishes and realizing I hadn't been breathing, but not realizing how long I had been holding my breath for. And then it was like I was having so much anxiety. That was like 2015, when like my holy shitstorm of everything that was happening. And I had so much anxiety. I was just vibrating with fear. And I was like, I almost felt like I was about to like just jump out of my skin. And I was not suicidal, although I had a little bit of suicidal ideation. Like I remember noticing, because I was trying all these affirmations, which I call like shellacking the turd. It's like if you think about like our souls are this like beautiful like gemstone of like like amazing, it's just glowing and it's light, and then we have trauma and it's like these little shit that gets caked around us, like all of the dirt and the grime and everything, and then suddenly it's like we're completely unknown and occluded, and like we can't feel ourselves and we don't know where we're going, completely lost. And then it's like, oh, let me just like say some affirmations, like let me try to mentalize, I'm gonna be positive. I read a Gabby Bernstein book, I'm gonna be positive now. So then I'm like doing all these affirmations, and I was able to like use the secret or the law of attraction for a while to manifest some things, but I couldn't keep them. Like I couldn't hold, and I didn't know what the fuck it was like totally crazy, but I was doing the best I could. And then it's like at some point you realize you're just shellacking the turd. You're just painting it, putting glitter on it. See my turd, isn't it pretty? I've got like spiritual platitudes, I've got lots of information, and like I'm so happy. But then I was like, wait a second, why am I like fantasizing about jumping onto the subway tracks? Or why am I thinking about throwing myself in front of that bus? Even if I don't have plans on doing it.
Right.
Someone who's doing really well probably isn't thinking about an exit.
So those images like, just don't come in.
Yeah, so I was like, shit. And I had to admit, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm not happy. I'm not feeling good. I'm feeling depressed. And then I was like, I admitted it to myself finally, like I'm depressed. And rightfully so. I had a bunch of shit going on and like no support and like totally lost in the sauce, and just starting to come out of dissociation. And I think if my retina hadn't detached, I wouldn't have realized how good I was at numbing and dissociating, because I was so emotional that anyone that saw me would think she's feeling her feelings. I even thought I was feeling my feelings. What I was in an almost perpetual state of rejecting them for the most part, but allowing them through theater and acting. Because when I was there, I couldn't be wrong.
Right.
I could be like a bad actor, maybe. I mean, I wasn't. I never got that note. They weren't like, you suck. They were like, you're great. Thank you. But it was like, that was my outlet. That's how I was feeling. But when it came to my own life, it was just like, there was no processing. I didn't know I was feeling, like there was just complete unconsciousness. And if it hadn't, and there were some other discoveries where I was like, oh, it's taking me sometimes 2 weeks to really know how I'm feeling about something. I'm really not in tune. And I think if my retina hadn't detached, yeah, I wouldn't have realized how much I had been pushing myself my whole life, and that I could push myself to that extent because I was numb to a large degree, which was why I naturally excelled in like the army and a lot of like self-denial and like pushing really hard until my body started to fall apart.
Yeah.
So I would have kept going.
Self-denial is one of those things that we use to feel like we're in control. I mean, I did papers on anorexia, bulimia when I was in college, because I was those things, and that's what it came down to. It was a grasp at control, feeling out of control, and this is the one thing that I can control, and yeah, and also just living in numbness because of that. Learning that we are supposed to be in self-denial, that we are supposed to deny our feelings and deny ourselves food and be small and be,
right, and deny our desires and to not feel pleasure and to not ask for too much and to not take up too much space and to not be an inconvenience to anyone.
Right.
So that ends up blocking our ability to receive in relationships and find satisfaction and to like, be abundant.
Yeah. And that kind of comes back to community and the importance of having people around you that you can actually express fully with, and that you're learning from. One of my strategies through life was to be the smartest person in the room. No offense to people in my life, but that was a mechanism that I had to keep control, to feel like I had worth and value. If I was contributing something, like, oh, well, I always have an answer, whatever the subject is. I could tell you I've read this, this, and this, and that. And to join a community and have relationships with people that might actually hold me accountable for my real potential was something I avoided, for a long time, because I didn't like being called out and I didn't like being wrong. And it felt safe, and it felt like I was in control when I was with people that didn't do that. But what you find is you're not growing. And often I think we think that the people that we will really truly connect with maybe don't exist. And then you meet some and you're like, oh. So, I have some friendships now that are so close and amazing, where they, and some of them are lifelong friends and some of them are newer friends, but where I actually connected with the fact that, yeah, it's okay if this person can call me out. I'm not going to avoid being around them, and avoid telling them the truth and sharing, real things, because we're not judging, we're learning, and we're enjoying the learning, and we're not threatened by each other.
Yeah, my good friends call me out. They do. They'll be like, hey, just want to point out some of your bullshit. I'm like, okay. I mean, they don't say it like that. They're really nice about it, but yeah.
Yeah, and also being able to have friends where you can do that for them, where it's not, oh my gosh, you're attacking me, So I've recently found that some of my relationships where I heard the same complaint over and over and over, like a broken record for years and years, that I was just like, I just can't keep engaging with this. And I straightforward, laid it out there, and she was like, how dare you? And I was like, okay, it's time for us to just take a break, because how dare you keep saying this stuff over and over and over to me? Like, that's not cool either.
You're like, I'm evolving this way. Would you like to come? And if not, you can stay here. That's cool. Maybe I'll catch you later.
Yeah. Oh, but we are coming up on time.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah. Well, I think this was really fun.
It was fun. Yeah, it was good. I like doing the podcast because it's like you never know where the conversation's gonna end up, which is cool.
Yeah, it is. It's fun, and I learned a lot. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you in less than 2 weeks.
Yep.
Looking forward to it. All right. Bye.
Bye.